For Family by Nanook 888. Chapter 14. Summons from on High. Some friendly games of sabacc, a spot of sightseeing around the executor's guns, a tour of the bridge, and hey, when we disguise as special field agents, we'll go bring some surprise inspections. Who knows, we could even inspect their stores and see what we find. Chewie wailed unnecessarily over Han's plans of passing time en route to Endor.
I have no idea what she sees in him. He's unruly, uncivilized, and utterly disrespectful of his elders.
Anakin was still smarting from Leia's fresh denunciation only minutes earlier, and Luke glanced with concern at his father, stooping in silent exasperation as they waited by the Lambda-class shuttle. When Anakin had returned from the Executor for the strategy meeting, he had snuck away two of these Imperial craft from the convoy he had used to conceal his departure. The second, the Tidirium, had been piloted by a droid to Polis Massa, and Anakin was leaving it with the Alliance.
Use it if you like,
he'd told Luke with a shrug. And now they lingered by the Diomede's lowered ramp, all but ready to depart, pretending to have some legitimate reason to still be standing there when all the while they were waiting for a certain person who didn't appear at the walkway entrance to the hangar. That's funny, I'm sure I heard something similar recently, Luke said, pretending to mull it over. About somebody else I know. Anakin turned to him suspiciously.
You've been speaking to Obi-Wan again, haven't you?
Luke affected an air of ignorant surprise. Why, would he know anyone who used to be unruly and utterly disrespectful?
Anakin huffed, but a small smile curled his lips. You should remember that his point of view is seriously one-sided.
Of course, Luke replied, as any one person's opinion often can be. Anakin eyed the scruffy man who was now arguing with the Wookiee whether the word fun even appeared in the comprehensive Imperial glossary for every boy in white.
The what?
Let alone have a stock of Corellian whiskey on board, and remained dubious. Give him time, father. You don't know him as we do. Both of his sensible, intelligent children seemed to have formed firm attachments with Solo. He had to concede the possibility of there being more to the glorified smuggler than first met the eye. Anakin sighed.
Very well, I will try.
Without turning his helmet, he peered at the walkway again, but there was still no sign of his daughter. Knowing that if they tarried any longer, they would miss the rendezvous with the rest of the Alliance task force, he finally resigned himself to the inevitable.
Are your preparations complete, General Solo?
He boomed. He didn't need to look to know that Luke was rolling his eyes. Han froze in mid-sentence and spun toward him with a mocking salute. Yes, my lord. Already, my lord.
Good. Then we depart.
Han clapped Luke on the back. He seemed to be about to say something, but hesitated and eventually just ruffled his hair. Later, kid, he said, then headed towards the Diomede. Be careful, Luke called after him. Han stopped, turned back. They shared a look of silent understanding that communicated all the things they couldn't put into words. Their close friendship, concerns for each other's safety, Leia, with a meaningful nod to Luke, and a last look that didn't quite manage to be entirely aloof at the still empty walkway. Han disappeared up the ramp. Luke found himself plucked off the ground by long, hairy arms to the music of a familiar howl. You take care too, Chewie, and try to keep Han out of trouble. With more growls that sounded very much like, of course, Chewie followed Han into the shuttle. To all outward appearances, Luke and Vader simply stood face to face in silence. They both knew why Mothma had banned Luke from going with them. It had very little to do with preparing their starfighter pilots for battle, and everything to do with safeguarding their options, just in case the worst happened at Endor.
I will return soon. Take care of your sister.
Always. May the Force be with you, Father.
And may the Force be with you, my son.
For just a moment, their minds touched. Then, with a final glance at the empty walkway, Anakin disappeared into the waiting shuttle. Admiral Akbar himself will lead the primary fleet division from Dargul. The second division from Arbra will be led by... Luke paused dramatically. General Calrissian. Maisie whistled. General, huh? Does that come with special perks like free gambling training? Lando's coolly pleased smile descended into a glare. It hadn't been the most profitable 2 days for him spent confined on the Falcon. Your luck will run out soon, we'll see who's laughing then, he grumbled. How many times have I gotta tell you? I grew up on my winnings from Djarik. Beginner's luck has nothing to do with it, old man. I mean, sir, he quipped with mock solemnity. What about us, Commander? Tron asked, wondering at the outcome of the final strategy meeting following Vader and Solo's departure. The two of you are assigned to the primary reserve task force. General Maydeen or Riker will dispatch you wherever additional ground support is needed. We won't let you down, sir. Tron still felt mightily guilty for shooting the princess and was determined to make up for it. Luke nodded kindly. I know. The force suddenly spiked in warning, and Luke's head snapped up. He dove into the force, but he couldn't pinpoint the danger. The ripples seemed to originate from various locations in the excavation facility. Just as he rose to his feet, the Falcon was rocked with explosions from outside. What the? Lando shouted as he grabbed some exposed cables on the wall to steady himself. Mazet was thrown off the curved seat, and Tran only just managed to brace himself on the Djarik table. Luke alone had managed to maintain balance on his feet. He stretched out his senses to the disturbance beyond the ship. Several blasts, he murmured as he felt along with the force. Throughout the facility seems to have come from outside. Several Kaladahans were injured. None seemed to be serious. Luke picked up on a streak of warning in the force that was almost concealed amidst the other threats and realized instantly that the multiple explosions were merely a ploy to confuse his senses. This was the real target. Its siren call, persistent and keening. He perceived the danger, the urgency, followed by a familiar presence that simultaneously made his heart miss a beat while setting his jaw on edge. He was nothing more than a dark blur as he shot out of the wreck area, followed a beat later by Lando. They almost crashed into R2, who careened around the curved corridor, with 3PO tottering after him as quickly as his awkward legs could manage. Oh, Master Luke! Master Luke! R2 says that a YT-2400... Luke had already bounced down the ramp and was leaping over the broken debris from the hangar ceiling, out of hearing range, but it didn't matter. He already knew. But that didn't prevent him from speeding through the surrounding corridors in a force-assisted sprint, deftly avoiding the shocked Kaladahans knocked off their feet by the earlier explosions. As he summoned his lightsaber into a hand and activated the blade. Maya! His mental call went unanswered, as you know it would be, even as he stretched out his senses and drew a desolate blank. Even as the knowledge that he was too late sank heavily around him, he still threw up one hand and blew the door open with a rush of the force. Her room was untouched from when he had left her, thanking the Kaladahan for their care only minutes earlier, save for the cloak that trailed a path from the wardrobe to the door, as if it had caught on something or someone on their way out. Luke peeled off again, clutching at the fading whispers in the force. Several turns later, he flew past Lando, emerging from the direction of the Falcon. What in the galaxy? Lando skipped to a halt to avoid being skewered by the glowing lightsaber and hurried to follow Luke, who had already disappeared down another corridor. Lando caught up with him seconds later at the entrance to a second empty hangar bay. Luke's sharp gaze was locked far in the distance through the open hangar doors amidst the star-speckled black sky, only on the curved sublight engine afterburners of a Corellian freighter ship. Lando didn't need the Force to know that it was the YT-2400 that the droids had detected, the very same that had been taken on Geonosis. For a moment, there was an intense spray of blue-white plasma from her trail. Then it was gone, vanishing away in light speed. What was that? Mara Jade. A dreadful feeling settled in Lando's gut. Where's Leia? Luke's eyes glinted. On that ship. Indecisive thoughts hurtled by as if snagged up and sent flying past the viewport along with the streams of light. The necessary codes had been set in the console earlier when he had almost set upon that course of action, but now he had swung back to indecision and the button simply continued its repetitive alternation of blinking on and off, confirming its readiness. All that was required was for the button to be depressed to activate it. All that was lacking was the conviction to depress it. Vader was Anakin Skywalker. That one thought whirled around Boba Fett's mind, pulling him hither and thither. It should have been straightforward. Fett's life and livelihood depended on revealing underhanded schemes and detecting conflict, and he could see that the Emperor was plotting against Vader as plainly as a hyperspace route signpost. He had already agreed to the job that would aid in Palpatine's scheme, albeit tacitly, while still in shock from discovering the connection between Vader and the name of Skywalker. And he was in receipt of a generous down payment. The Emperor's goading had also ensured the added incentive to act precisely in opposition to there being an understanding between him and Vader, and he had no doubt that Palpatine's slip of revealing who Vader was no slip at all. It was a precise move designed to aggravate his hatred of the Jedi, and it had done the trick. He would have happily backed Palpatine and sent Vader hightailing his way to hell. Save for one small detail.
It may interest you to learn that Skywalker's father had a hand in the death of Mace Windu.
And therein lay the quandary. Although he only now comprehended Vader's motive in terminating his pursuit of Solo and the rebels on Geonosis, specifically Luke Skywalker, his son, Fett understood enough of Vader to know why the Dark Lord had thrown that snippet of information at him as they deliberated the rebels' fate. Fett had his own code of honor, ensuring that he saw the job through to completion once he had accepted a bounty. In a profession full of swindling backstabbers, it made it reliable. That, combined with his near-absolute success rate, made him one of the best and most sought-after bounty hunters of his time. No ordinary circumstance would have made Fett surrender his pursuit of Solo, certainly not such a trifling obstacle as a blasted concussion, and especially not when that bounty involved Jabba the Hutt, and Vader knew this. So the Dark Lord had compelled Fett into walking away by making the whole business entirely personal. Fett would only get to Han Solo through Skywalker, but Skywalker's father had helped bring down the Jedi who had murdered the man Fett considered as his own father. Vader was Anakin Skywalker. No wonder Vader had known. Anakin Skywalker's involvement in the death of a fellow prominent member of the Jedi Order must have been one of the best kept secrets in the galaxy. Fett hadn't even heard a whiff of it in all his years of investigating what had finally brought down Mace Windu. Fett still didn't know what had transpired exactly, but he didn't doubt Vader's claim. In all his dealings with the Dark Lord, Fett had found him to be cunning, brilliant, calculating, merciless, relentless, ruthless, and downright murderous. But he was never dishonest. Fett wanted to destroy Vader for once having been a Jedi, and Luke Skywalker for still being one. Cooperating with Palpatine would be an easy ride to this goal, and he would be handsomely rewarded in the process. But Vader had helped kill Windu, and with that knowledge came a feeling that had never sat well with Fett. That of being indebted. It didn't matter that it was a prearranged job, nor, he knew, did avenging Jango Fett have anything to do with it. He still felt as if he owed Vader one for it. It was repulsive. Outside of viewports of Slave One, the streaks of light abruptly drew up into pinpricks of white stars as his ship dropped out of light speed. He was right where Palpatine wanted him, stuck way out on a limb in the middle of precisely nowhere, staring at some lush green moon that was apparently called Endor. But which of the two Siths to aid? Carry out his paid job and help destroy Vader? Or work with Vader and risk Palpatine's wrath should they fail? Or simply walk away and leave them to it? As the blasted button continued blinking innocently on the console before him, Fett realized there was only one thing he could do. There was only one course of action to nullify the odious sense of obligation to a Jedi. He reached forward and firmly pressed the button. The Imperial emblem flashed across every HoloNet channel strictly controlled by the Empire, a whitewash of all broadcast along the entire length of the galaxy. Everywhere, that is, except for one crucial quarter. The outer and inner Zuma regions containing the forest moon of Endor, where not a glimpse of it was seen, and life continued uninterrupted and unaware. Everywhere else, from the corporate sector's opulent business headquarters in the uppermost reaches of the Tingle Arm to the opposite end of the hiding way past Polis Massa down to Iminusuf, across the breadth of the galaxy, from the remote long-range communications base on Esfandia to the watery Mon Calamari homeworld of Dak, from Imperial Center to the extremities of the Corellian Run. Across trillions of holoprojectors across the galaxy, the insignia was routed through millions of massive decoders to project from every active holoprojector, be it a ship or household, civilian or military, imperial or alliance. The infamous symbol spun on a vertical axis before shrinking away to reveal the hooded, scarred visage that was known and feared in every corner of the galaxy.
Loyal citizens of the Empire,
Palpatine began. The disturbingly sincere paternal tone ensuing from bloodless lips evoked a sinister image, that of a coiled serpent offering sanctuary in the brace of its venomous fangs.
It grieves me to address you under such dire circumstances,
he began in a voice that reflected every shade of grief of which he spoke.
But I must be the bearer of grave tidings. At 1400 hours Galactic Standard Time today, the Imperial Palace received a most foreboding communication. The Rebel Alliance has commandeered the second Death Star in the Chomel sector and is holding the Galactic Empire to ransom.
His voice wavered as if overcome with the horror of the news he conveyed.
Following the destruction of the first Death Star by the so-called rebels 3 years ago, when 2 million brave Imperial servicemen and women perished in a most tragic waste of life, construction was commenced on the second Death Star in top-secret locations under my own personal supervision. As with the first Death Star, the second Death Star was designed for one purpose and one purpose only, for the security and protection of the loyal systems of the Empire and their people. So it is particularly devastating to hear that this battle station has been hijacked by the very terrorists from whom we had worked so hard to protect you. I immediately dispatched my faithful right hand, Lord Darth Vader, in an effort to regain control of the battleship. But it is with great regret that I must report the loss of all communication with his flagship, the Executor, and that the Supreme Commander of the Imperial Forces is missing in action.
Palpatine's drooping shoulders and anxious tone portrayed all of his supposedly genuine concern.
As you know, I had been traveling to Naboo to personally sign the peace treaty that the Empire has been working so tirelessly to implement with the rebels. I must now distress you further with the news that my transport was attacked in mid-transit and I have been abducted by the Rebel Alliance. I appear before you under guard from aboard the second Death Star.
The holo-recorder panned out to reveal the Emperor seated on an elevated throne, complete with webbed circular viewport. Behind, 2 armed guards stood at rigid attention on either side of him, garbed in bedraggled, motley combat gear. The scarred grooves around his white lips deepened as he continued with renewed horror in his voice.
I am faced with a terrible decision. The Rebel Alliance is dictating new terms of the treaty, making unreasonable demands that threaten the very future of the Empire. But should I fail to comply with these terms, the rebels will use the immense firepower of this Death Star to obliterate my home planet of Naboo.
Palpatine's hooded face was briefly replaced with the image of a half-formed Death Star, its skeletal curves reaching around like a hand encasing a sphere. The circular primary super laser dish was the central focus of the completed part of the station, menacingly prominent before the aqua-green planets suspended in the distance.
I have also been threatened with Naboo's destruction should any attempt be made to rescue me. The rebels have agreed to an attendance of 3 Star Destroyers to prevent any rash attempts being made to reach me by fervently loyal citizens, and these now flank the Death Star. Time is of the essence,
he said with deliberate emphasis, to rule out any possible misunderstanding.
There are 6 hours to comply with the new terms.
A hint of dark glee now escaped his magnanimous persona and crept into his sickly, caressing voice.
To ensure compliance, I have been joined aboard the Death Star by one of the leaders of the Rebel Alliance, the last surviving member of the Royal House of Alderaan, Princess Leia Organa.
He gave a momentous pause.
I see only one way to resolve this conflict and avoid the tragic loss of an entire world and its people. One member of the Rebel Alliance alone holds the power to see reason and negotiate for true peace.
He practically spat.
Master Jedi Luke Skywalker.
And with that, Palpatine's benevolent facade vanished. Utterly uncompromising, he declared,
To all citizens of the Empire, I give my solemn vow. This pointless fighting that has blighted our peace for too many years has reached its end. It is time to restore the Galactic Empire to absolute order and security.
Even the deep shadows of his hood couldn't conceal the blaze of his yellow eyes. Across the millions of sea threads and hundreds of light years, his piercing gaze sought the one he summoned.
Come to the Death Star, Jedi Skywalker. The peace of the galaxy and the lives of billions rest in your hands.